Hey there, welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're zooming past the daily headlines to look at a massive, massive economic shift happening right beneath the surface of the conflict in Ukraine. It's a story about agriculture, global economics, and really the entire future of our food supply. Okay, let's dive into this. To really wrap our heads around the gravity of the situation, we've got to start with this staggering number, 71%. That is how much of Ukraine's entire landmass is agricultural land. It's huge. Before the full-scale invasion, this incredible natural resource made up 20% of the nation's workforce and 11% of its total GDP. We're talking about the literal economic backbone of the country here. So, here is our game plan for today. First, the breadbasket opens up. Second, phase 2, the massive expansion. Third, the argument for modernization, followed by the argument against exploitation, and finally, war, debt, and land. All right, section 1, the breadbasket opens up. Let's get a little historical context. Walking through this timeline, it's a pretty fascinating progression. Way back in 2001, Ukraine put a moratorium on land sales. Now, this was only supposed to be a temporary fix to help manage the super complicated shift from Soviet-era collective farms over to private ownership. But as these things often go, that temporary measure stuck around for nearly 2 decades. Fast forward to March 2020, and a historic and highly controversial law was passed to finally lift that moratorium. By July 2021, Phase 1 of the new land market officially opened up, and then in January 2024, Phase 2 went into effect. Just to show you how controversial that 2020 decision really was, check out these numbers. Before the market opened, a 2021 poll by the Kyiv International Institute of Sociology showed that 65.5% of Ukrainians actually wanted to keep that 2001 moratorium in place. People were terrified of corruption and corporate takeovers. But despite the will of the vast majority, President Zelensky signed the land reform into law anyway, sending the country down a totally new economic path. Moving right along to Section 2, Phase 2, the massive expansion. Let's see what's happening right now. Now, what's really interesting about this transition is the sheer scale of the change. In Phase 1, things were pretty restricted. Basically, only individuals could buy land, and it was capped at 100 hectares, which is roughly 247 acres. But then we hit Phase 2 in January 2024. Boom. The market opens up to legal entities, meaning businesses and corporations. And that cap? It skyrockets to 10,000 hectares. That is a 100 times mathematical jump. This specific, explosive change is the absolute crux of the entire debate we're digging into today. And you know what's wild? Despite the chaos and volatility of the ongoing conflict, the market has actually stayed incredibly stable. Just look at the completed sales. The Agricultural Ministry reports that 283,000 hectares were sold during this period. Sure, regions right near the front line or areas with explosives are off limits for obvious reasons, but everywhere else, demand is surging. Agribusiness experts are even predicting prices could jump up another 25% this year, which would push the cost of a single hectare to well over $3,300. Let's jump into Section 3, the argument for modernization. We're going to look at the pro-reform side of the aisle first. I think this quote from Ukraine's agricultural minister Mykola Solsky hits the nail on the head regarding the government's stance. He says, business is not guided by sentiment. We must have convenient rules no worse than in countries where people are willing to invest. The government is basically arguing that moving fast and decisively is absolutely crucial right now. For Ukraine to stay competitive globally and fund its own defense and recovery, they believe they literally cannot afford to pause this economic evolution, even in the middle of a full-scale war. So from the agribusiness perspective, Phase 2 isn't just good, it's essential for post-war reconstruction. Proponents argue that the new laws finally create a transparent mechanism for development. You see, during Phase 1, companies were resorting to these crazy administrative workarounds, like getting their individual employees to buy up 100-hectare plots just to cobble together enough land to farm efficiently. By finally allowing legal entities to just buy the 10,000 hectares outright, the market pulls in the massive financing needed to build out infrastructure, like green elevators and processing warehouses. Plus, let's be real, corporate entities have the deep pockets required to bring in modern farming tech that actually boosts land productivity. Okay, switching gears to Section 4, the argument against exploitation. Let's hear what the critics have to say. So the crucial point for the anti-reform crowd is captured perfectly in this 2020 policy paper by the United Nations. They issued a stark warning stating, further concentration of land in a few hands must be prevented. To take full effect, smallholders and smaller farms must be supported. The underlying fear here? Critics are terrified that without strong state support and access to credit, the small mom-and-pop family farmers are going to get completely squeezed out by these giant, well-funded corporations. And honestly, you can see why they're worried when you look at the current data. Right now, over 9 million hectares, that's a whopping 28% of Ukraine's arable land, is already in the hands of domestic oligarchs and huge agribusinesses. This level of consolidation is exactly why groups like EcoAction and the Oakland Institute are sounding the alarm. They're warning that these new laws are just going to skew ownership even further toward total corporate dominance. These critics have some very specific concerns. First up, they argue the law just consolidates land among oligarchs and corrupt players who already have the capital to spend. Second, everyday small farmers have had virtually zero financial support since the invasion started, so how are they supposed to compete in a bidding war against multinational corporations? No way. Third, large-scale industrial farming almost always means fewer local agriculture jobs. And finally, they're warning that this whole thing accelerates a sort of stealth takeover by foreign equity funds who are using the fog of war to grab up the region's most valuable resources. Bringing it all together in Section 5, War, Debt, and Land. Let's look at the broader economic pressure cooker here. When you look at research from the Oakland Institute, you start to see this really complex financial web. It plays out like a step-by-step puzzle. Step 1, Western financial institutions like the World Bank and the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development tie their desperately needed aid to very strict structural adjustment programs. Step 2, those programs actually mandate the creation of a liberalized land market and enforce strict austerity measures. And step 3, as Ukraine piles up crippling war debt, those exact same institutions leverage that debt to push for even more privatization in the agricultural sector, a sector that, surprise, surprise, heavily favors the massive agribusinesses those institutions are already financing. Now, I want to clarify a really important legal distinction here because you might be wondering about foreign ownership. As it stands today, foreign individuals and companies are strictly prohibited from directly buying Ukrainian farmland, but they can lease it. On top of that, major players, we're talking U.S. pension funds, European banks, Saudi sovereign wealth funds, they are already investing heavily by simply buying shares in the Ukrainian agrobusinesses that do own the land. So while a direct foreign buyout is legally restricted and would actually need a full national referendum to change, foreign capital is already deeply, deeply embedded in the market. Which really just leaves us with this final provocative thought. When the dust finally settles and the conflict comes to an end, who is actually going to own the breadbasket of Europe? Will it be the everyday citizens and the small family farmers of Ukraine? Or are we looking at a consolidated network of oligarchs and global financial institutions? Make no mistake, the answer to this question won't just shape Ukraine's post-war reconstruction. It is absolutely going to dictate the future of global food supplies for decades to come. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and as always, keep questioning the deeper stories behind the headlines.